But I want to start with you, Jim Messina. You and I have worked together a lot over the years. I was describing what a boiler room is earlier. You can probably describe it better than I do. But you're a data guy. As you're looking at this data, I don't want to ask you what surprised you. I want to ask you kind of what struck you as different from what maybe a lot of people out there thought would be where things stand right now.
The fact that the Trump theory of the case on rural voters really was true. You know, I freaked out a bunch of Dems on Sunday on your show when I said, look at the early vote numbers. The enthusiasm for Trump in rural is real. And that's exactly what you saw. Kornacki was just going over it. He's just doing better than he'd ever done before and just running up these things. And the other thing was the Latino number. It's just, you cannot look at those exit polls and not think that is amazing. Going forward, the Democrats have a real rural problem, and they have real communication challenges to a whole bunch of groups, including young voters and Latinos, that we thought we had a better message to and just didn't at all. Those are the two things that really struck me so far.
The rural city divide is one that struck me earlier as well in the evening. And 8 years ago, a lot of the focus was on education. Is education a part of that as well, or is it more community cultural and kind of you're living in a rural area, you're living in a city?
I think it's cultural, right? I think the Democrats no longer speak to a whole group of people in these places. I mean, they were just laying it out. Barack Obama did 40 points better than Kamala Harris in some of these precincts just 12 years ago. Like, we have just stopped being able to communicate with these people, and they no longer feel seen by the Democratic Party. And that is a challenge going forward. I hope we don't all rush. I hope we all take some time, look at all these things, do a comprehensive report, and talk about how to move forward, because we got our butts kicked tonight, and we got to figure out how to move forward in a way that gets us back to being the majority party we used to be.
Tim, as I said to you earlier, I always hate it when people say it's a communications problem. It's not the totality of it, and that's not what Jim Messina is saying either. But there is this question of how to reach, because there's been a reliance by Democrats on running up the city vote, running up the suburban vote, expanding the blob, as Steve Kornacki always says, the blue blob. You've actually worked in Republican circles. What is going wrong here on that front?
And I just think the Democrats right now have to just reckon with the fact that there's a fundamental brand problem with the party as far as not reaching like huge swaths of the country. You know, Jim listed a couple of them with rural and Hispanics. But if you look at the exit polls, Trump gained with every demographic group except college-educated women. Everyone. Black men, Hispanic men and Hispanic women, non-college women. So it wasn't really even a race and gender thing in particular. It was widespread. And there's a brand issue. And to your reference about my kind of time at the Republican Party, I look back at 2012 when we lost with Romney, right? And afterwards, we did the autopsy and we looked at it and we're like, we need to fix this little thing or that little thing. And that might make the difference if we reached out to this group more or that group. The reality was that the Romney-Ryan party did not appeal to broad swaths of the country. It did not appeal to black and brown Americans. It also didn't really appeal that much to working class Americans. Obama cut into his margins there. That's where the Democrats are right now. They get so when you say communicate, but it's more like we got to figure out how to talk to them. It's not about a talking points. Democrats have to think about how their brand is resonating outside of college-educated, urban and suburban, white America. Yeah,
that's what I mean. It's bigger than a set of words.
Yeah.
And so people shouldn't define it as words, in my view. Michael Steele, I just want to ask you a big open-ended question about how you're taking in what we know now. We don't know everything. Right. There's still more votes to come in, but based on what we know now.
So, there's a lot of stuff inside of my head that wants to rage at this, but then I really kind of went back to what I wanted to do in 2010, and that's exactly what happened here tonight with the Republican Party or the MAGA Party. What I learned in that period of time was the American people always tell you what they want. You just better listen to them.
But what do you think the American people are telling us they want?
They don't like the whole thing, the impression that their kids are being put through some type of, deprogramming or reprogramming, imagined or real. They think the economy is not their friend. they blame Joe Biden for this economy, right? No, for their personal economy. They're frustrated with, and you talked, Jim, you hit on the cultural piece, as did my friend here, Tim. The cultural piece is a huge piece for the American people. And what we learned tonight, it's not just the folks who live in the rural parts in the country, in the backwoods. It's people who live right over here off of Park Avenue, the people who live off of Pennsylvania Avenue in D.C. And the reality of it is, I think for our political system, because I'm going to set aside the MAGA piece for a while, because those Republicans, like myself and Cheney and others, the question becomes what is the other narrative that you put up? Because once MAGA begins to do its thing, which it will, I mean, tonight was Donald Trump standing there basically reading everything that was on the prompter, looking like, okay, we got this. But you could see, and you know that there's going to be a slide into something else.
Well, we've seen this movie a thousand times.
We've seen this movie a thousand times. But here's the thing. The American people are okay with that. So what's the countermeasure? What's the countermeasure to what we see Donald Trump do every day? Because clearly it's not enough to say democracy's at stake. Because the American people are like, yeah, I don't really feel that. I don't think that. Now, even though, ironically, in our own exit polling, folks were like, a democracy was important to them, right?
Well, but just to dig into that for a second, yes, but majority say democracy under threat, 75%. But among voters who believe that, half went for Harris and half went for Trump.
There you are.
Right.
That's exactly where I was going. So you've got this space where there's a lot to learn from tonight. The challenge is going to be how the Democratic Party learns what it needs to learn and deal with what's going to come beginning on January 20th, when the further deconstruction of all the administrative states that we think hold this union together come under assault. Because, at the end of the day, it may not be Donald Trump, but a lot of people on that stage and a lot of people who are going to be in that oval with him, that's what they want to do. And as much as they want to lie about Project 2025, they laid it out. They're not going to just go, oh, well, we just 900 pages of nothing. That's not how this works. So you're going to see two competing moments that the country's going to confront, one of which they won't care about, right, which is all the stuff because they think Trump is good. So they're not going to be concerned about that. The Democrats are going to have to worry about that, plus, to Jim's point, how do you begin to level up a message to turn around those numbers that they saw tonight?
And we will get into together a couple things, including the fact that Trump also has a Republican Senate. We don't know where control of the House is,
right.
which is a big factor. But Molly, I want to ask you, there's a lot of data to dig through. One of the things that you and I've talked about a lot is women voters. I mean, Trump improved among women from how he did in the past, according to the exit polls. The other thing that struck me is that these ballot initiatives on abortion in Florida, Arizona, and some other states where the majority of voters voted to protect abortion rights, and there was a big overlap of people who also voted for Trump, which to me means we maybe didn't capture or didn't discuss or didn't accurately analyze the fact that people can think about things in multiple ways that bend the mind, but they can vote to protect abortion rights and still vote for the guy who essentially killed them. But give me your what is you're looking at women voters, abortion rights.
The only bright spot in this entire night was that white college-educated women were not having it. That said, white, non-college-educated women were all in. And I think that, look, we're in a completely different media universe than we were in 2012 or 2010. And I think that's a really important point. We don't know where people are getting their news. And remember, Donald Trump in that speech said it was a huge win for democracy. So his people also think that he's protecting democracy, which in itself is a huge communication problem here, right? And I think that, it's, when you would talk to the campaign, they would always be like, are we reaching people? And that is a media problem, right? Newspapers, some of the reasons why newspapers aren't endorsing are complicated and scary, but some of the reason why is because it doesn't matter. It doesn't move the needle. Newspaper endorsements used to really matter, like a decade ago, 2 decades ago. We have had a seismic shift in the way that people read news, watch television, all of that information. And I think we have to look at also sort of the level of disinformation, misinformation that people are getting and what that looks like.